such as Jawaharlal Nehru, V.V. Ramaswamy Nayak, Jyotiba Phule, and Vijayalakshmi Pandit. At the beginning, we will discuss the ideas of Jawaharlal Nehru because he contributed many things for development of modern India. The development of modern India. This chart discuss the Nehru views on political thought. Let us see one by one. First, we will move on early life of Jawaharlal Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru was born on 14th November 1889 in Allahabad in British India. He is son of Motilal Nehru and Swaruprani Tashu. And Jawaharlal Nehru was the eldest of three children, two of whom were girls. The elder sister, Vijayalakshmi, and later became the first female president of the United Nations General Assembly. And the younger sister, Krishna Kuti Singh, and became a noted writer and authored several books on her brother. Jawaharlal Nehru was the first Prime Minister of India and a general figure in Indian politics before and after independence. He is considered to be architect of the modern Indian. He was also known as Pandit Nehru due to his roots with the Kashmiri Pandit community, while many Indian children knew him such a Nehru. And let us see education. Jawaharlal Nehru received the primary education under the guidance of an English governor. And young Jawaharlal was taught to converse in English from early age. He also learned the appropriate customs of the British Raj. The early educations of Jawaharlal Nehru played a major role in his political views and economic policies. Later, when he had begun his institutional schooling in 1905 at Harrow, a leading school in England, he was greatly influenced by G.M. Trevelyan Garibaldi books. And Nehru went to Trinity College, Cambridge in October 1907 and graduated with an honors degree in natural science in 1910. And during this period, he also studied politics, economics, history, and literature. And after completing his degree in 1910, Nehru went to London and stayed there for 2 years for law studies at the Inns of Court School of Law. During this time, he continued to study the scholars of Fabian Society, including Patrice Webb. He passed his bar examination in 1912 and was admitted to the English bar. After returning to India, August 1912, Nehru enrolled himself as an advocate of the Allahabad High Court and tried to settle down as a barrister. And next we will discuss the Nehru role on Indian independence struggle. Nehru had developed an interest in Indian politics during his time in Britain. After he returned to India in the year 1912, he had attended an annual sessions of the Indian National Congress in Patna. The Congress in 1912 had been the party of moderate and elites. Nehru agreed to work for the party in support of the Indian civil rights movement in South Africa. He collected funds for the civil rights campaigners led by Mohandas Gandhi in 1913. And Nehru was not satisfied with the peace of the national movement. He involved with aggressive nationalist leaders who were demanding home rule for Indians. And next, we will move on the non-cooperative movement. The first big national involvement of Nehru came at came at the onset of non-cooperation movement in 1920. He led the movement in the United Provinces. At present in Uttar Pradesh, Nehru was arrested on charges of anti-governmental activities in 1921 and was released a few months later. After the Chauri Chaura incident, the Nehru remained loyal to Gandhi and did not join the Swaraj party formed by his father Motilal Nehru and CRDL. Nehru and most of the Congress leaders were initially unsure about Gandhi's plan to being civil disobedience with a satyagraha aimed at the British salt tax. And after the protest gathered steam, they realized the power of salt as the symbol. The Nehru remark about the unprecedented popular response, it seems as though aspirin had been suddenly released. He was arrested on 14th April 1930 while entraining from Allahabad for Raipur. He had earlier, after addressing a huge meeting and leading a vast procession, ceremoniously manufactured some contraband salt. And next we move on one of the Nehru's significant thought on democratic socialism. Nehru is one of the main exponent of democratic socialism. In simple terms, the democratic socialism as an ideology is an extension of the liberal propagations of democracy altered to suit the need to follow the countries of the world. It is an ideology to meet the needs of the whole community. And the ideology believes that democracy and socialism are one and indivisible. There cannot be true democracy without a true socialism, and there cannot be true socialism without a true democracy. The two come together in equality, social justice, fair share for all, and an irreversible shift in the balance of wealth and power to workers and their families. Democratic socialism supports the social and economic justice and opposes the exploitations of workers, the actual procedure of wealth. And democratic socialists work within the organized political parties and preservations of the pluralistic characteristics of the society. And the newly emerging social and economic factor transform the character and role of the state in the changed post-industrial context. And Nehru wanted to achieve for reaching consequences in the field of democratic socialism, so he put emphasis on mixed economy. And for the improvement of the economic conditions of India, Nehru wanted a close collaboration of private sector with public sector. Further, he wanted the development human resource for achieving this end. By following the idea of mixed economy, he wanted massive industrialization in the nook and corner of India. For the success of democratic socialism, Nehru put emphasis on the cooperative movement in India. He rejected the trusteeship ideas of Gandhi and viewed that the wealthy person should own the factories, etc., and the poor will work there. The state should come to help for maintaining these factories through granting loan that will be possible through cooperative societies. So he invented the visions of modern India, which will maintain a primary school, a panchayat and cooperative society. By instituting the democratic socialism, Nehru adopted a middle path between the capitalism and communism. So he preached democratic socialism. In these words, I must frankly confess that I am a socialist and a republican, and I am no believer in king's industry, who has greater power over the lives and for the tunes of men. And the next we will move on Nehru's thought on secularism. So another important view, the Nehru thought on secularism. The Nehru was a true secularist, and no religious doctrine that satisfied his scientific quest for truth and reality. As a humanist thinker, Nehru respected the great founder of religion, but he rapidly condemned the role of organized religion in society. He was aware of its danger and misuse. Nehru realized the relevance of secular state in order to preserve and protect the composite culture traditions of Indian society. It was also essential for the maintenance of social stability and religious harmony among a diverse group. To maintain national unity and orderly progress in a pluralist society. Nehru considered the secularism is a vital necessity. It implied that state should not have any religion. Neither should it have affinity with any religion, but it should protect the rights and freedom of all religious communities. He also believed that the material progress should be based on ethical and moral principles and continued his faith in Gandhian principles of spiritualizations of politics. Nehru has no attractions for any religion. According to him, behind every religion lay a method of approach which was holy and scientific. But he recognizes that religion provides some kind of satisfaction to the inner needs of human nature and give a set of moral, ethical values of life in general. And Nehru's approach to the role religion played in social life is described that the religion as is a bit practiced and accepted even by thinking minds, whether it was Hinduism or Islam or Buddhism or Christianity, did not attract me. It seems to be closely associated with superstitious practices and dogmatic belief, and behind it lawyer method of approach to life's problem, which was certainly not that of science. There was an element of magic about it, a reliance on the supernatural. Nehru's understanding of secularism was a product of personal attitude and historical circumstances. So secularism is basically the separation of religions from politics. The politics is associated with the public activities and the religious is an individual or personal affair, giving everyone the right to practice one's own religion. The referring to the concept of secularism, Nehru says that it is a state which honors all faith equally and give them equal opportunities. That as a state, it does not allow itself to be attached to one faith or religion, which then become the state religion. And Nehru disapproved both the Hindu communalism as well as Muslim communalism. Nehru disapproved both the Hindu communalism and as well as the Muslim communalism. His loyalty to secularism has been great relief to the minorities in India. The Nehru's understanding of secularism has been strengthened due to his liberal cultural upbringing. The concept of secularism, as defined by Nehru, constitutes the bedrock of Indian nationalism, which was subsequently incorporated into the Indian Constitution. Nehru's understanding of secularism is primarily rooted in his emphasis. That is, the state does not either encourage or discourage religion. It means the freedom of religion and conscience, including the freedom for those who have no religion. And the second one, it conveys the idea of social and political equality. And the third one, Nehru promoted secularism through social transformation and development. It means eradicating inequality and backwardness. Despite his liberal approach towards religion, towards the religion, it is not easy to declare Nehru irreligious. He was not opposed to religion. He frankly recognized that the religion supplies a deeper craving of human being. His major concern was that the state should not intervene in the religious matter. It is beyond dispute that Nehru was sincere in his advocacy of secularism as a political and cultural value. Due to his secular approach, he succeeded in solving intra-party and interstate politics. And another important concept is Nehru's ideas on internationalism. The Nehru emerged as an outstanding leader, a spokesman of the idea, the belief, rational liberations, and the social progress, which ultimately become the driving force of the people of Asia and Africa both during and after the liberations movement of India. Nehru consistently maintained an international outlook. Even his nationalism remained an inalienable part of the larger humanity that transcends beyond national boundaries. The Nehru ideology of internationalism is as powerful as his views on nationalism. The Gandhis rightly mentioned that his nationalism is equal to his internationalism. Nehru was more interested in synthesizing his ideas on internationalism. He emphasized that we have now to lay greater stress on the synthetic aspect and make the whole world our field of study. He believed that the synthesis was necessary both for the individual and for the nation if they were to grow out of the narrow growth of thought and action. Nehru's deep and broad base. How knowledge of history, how the knowledge of history and philosophy helped him to encompass many world problems. He was conscious of the advance of science and technology, which made the whole world one single family. And Nehru was convinced the existed between the people of the East and West was due to lack of industrial growth. So, according to Nehru, the real difference was in the medievalism of the East and the industrial mechanical progress of the West. The world became too small for the high ambitions of these European powers. The narrow spirit of nationalism was wiped up every Western country to mislead the masses in order to hate their neighbor, and they were kept ready for war. The Europe became an armed camp, and there were fire competitions in industry and trade and armament. The Nehru held that a blind nationalism thus began to dominate Europe. Nehru asserted that owing to scientific and technological advancement, the countries came closer, but the whole structure of society under the new industrial capitalism such that it bred frictions between the nation and nation, the class and class, man and man, and made appeals for the nationalism and scientism. Once he held, politics led me to economics, and this led me to science and to the scientific approach. And the next one, democracy and socialism as basis of Nehru's internationalism. His ideology of internationalism was guided by the ideal of democracy and socialism. He was highly influenced by the idea of French Revolution because it challenged many old and orthodox notions of religions and society by way of advancing new theories. Such political thinking was confined to France at the time, the religion seemed to give permanent and even a honored place to liberty. The very ideas of liberty and equality, they were opposed to the authority outlook of that church and society. It is in their perspective that Nehru advocated secularism both for the Indian nationalism and internationalism. He aimed that the early democrat naturally looked to the idea of nationalism. Their demand for freedom of thought and speech could hardly be reconciled with the dogmatic religions and theology. And the advent of the modern state and the modern nations lead to the democratizations and the secularizations of policies, and the nationalism found in democracy a good ally, which was explained by Nehru. Nehru identified democracy with nationalism. He traced from the French revolutions the dimensions of democracy and nationalism and appealed to the Indian context. Thus, it was the word outlook which provoked him to move in the directions for framing the ideology for India. He also mentioned that the Indian nationalists still refer to the French revolutions and the right of Mon, but not appreciating that much has happened since then. And the next significant thinkers is E.V. Ramasamy Naikar. I hope that we all know him. Let us see E.V. Ramasamy Naikar's views on political thought. Let's see one by one. Um, let's move on. The early life of E.V. Ramasamy Naikar. E.V. Ramasamy Naikar was a prominent social reformer of India in the 20th century. He was born of Balijan Naidu family on 20th September 1879 at Erode in Coimbatore district in Tamil Nadu. He came from a prosperous business family in that district, but he did not have any formal education. His childhood days showed a rebellious character which continued with his social and political activities. He defied all caste rules and regulations in his childhood, and for that he was often taken to task by his parents. And his home was a meeting place for Pandit and religious scholars. So Pandit and religious scholars. Uh, he uh, he came from a prosperous business family in the districts. He did not have any formal educations, and his childhood days showed the rebellious character which continued with his social and political activities. And he defied all caste rules and regulation in his childhood, and for that he was often taken to task by his parents. His home was a meeting place for Pandit and religious scholars. These discussions and discourses provide an opportunity to EVR to come to know about some basic of Hinduism. But soon he changed his role of a passive listener to that of an active participant. He started asking questions about inconsistencies and improbabilities in the Puric stories and ridiculed a basic concept Hindu religious and philosophy. More persistent questions were asked by him about the relevance of institutions of caste in society, belief in the theory of karma, and the soundness of idol worship. None of the pandits were able to him convincing answer. And the next move on the political activities. up to the 1930. The political activities up to 1930 is the EVR participation in the politics of Tamil Nadu till 1920 was minimal. He participated in a protest meeting the next, we will move on political activities up to 1930. The political activities up to 1930, EVR participation in the politics of Tamil Nadu till 1920 was minimal. He participated in a protest meeting 1960s organized against the government action, organized against the government actions against the home rule organ and New India. But they maintained political contact with important nationalist leader from 1917 onwards. The non-Brahmins formed to represent and safeguard the non-Brahmins' interest in the nominal organization, and at the same time to repudiate the claim of the Justice Party to be the sole representative of the non-Brahmins community in the Madras Presidency. EVR viewed such efforts for representations of non-Brahmins as inspired by the need for social justice. And next we will move on Varnashrama Dharma. The EVR held every strong views against the fourfold divisions. The fourfold divisions of caste hierarchy in the Indian society. He joined the Congress for its lofty ideals and goals, one of which was the abolition of untouchability. His fight against it at Vaikom was by itself a vigorous agitations which engaged the susceptibilities of Brahmins. And moreover, the Justice Party formations was itself a revolt against the Brahmanas and Varnashrama Dharma. And in such a context, any attempt to reinforce such belief in Varnashrama Dharma would be counterproductive in the Madras Presidency. Unfortunately, Mahatma Gandhi expressed his firm belief in Varnashrama Dharma on September 1927 at Kadalur. He appealed to the non-Brahmins that in their against the Brahmins, against the Brahmins, the non-Brahmins should not work the system Varnashrama Dharma, the bedrock of Hinduism. However, he stoutly rejected the notion of higher and low status attached to the system Varnashrama Dharma and suggested that neither the ban on intermarriage or that the interdining was an integral part of it. But too many non-Brahmins in the Tamil region, Varnashrama Dharma could mean the superiority of Brahmins over the rest of the population. And let us see the self-respect movement in 1925. E.V. Ramaswamy Nayakar gave a concrete shape to his ideas and social reform by founding the Suyamariyadai Iyakkam, otherwise known as the self-respect movement. It was a reform movement dedicated to the goal of giving non-Brahmin a sense of pride based on the Dravidian past. The movement denied the superiority of Brahmins and their implicit faith in the present system. The movement sought to turn the present social system topsy-turvy and they established a living bond union among all the people, irrespective of caste or creed, including the untouchables. One of the essential points was a denial the mythology. Essential point was a denial of the mythology of Hinduism by which in content that and suspecting were made victim of the Brahmins. Since the Brahmin was seen as a leader of the social and religious life of Tamil Nadu, he became a target of self-respect attack. And Hitan of the movement was determined by EVR, who represented a new type of leader in Tamil Nadu. And the self movement concentrated almost entirely on the Tamil district. It covered primarily the group low in the social hierarchy, like the Vanniya Kula Kshatriyas, and the untouchables. The special effort were also directed at women and young people. Because of the directness and simplicity of its message, the illiterate and semi-educated in the rural area turned to the movement. This was a new development in Tamil Nadu politics. The Justice Party, which claimed to be the sole representative of the non-Brahmins, did not bother to cover these groups. In fact, the leadership of the Justice Party was drawn from the land-moving group and attempted to cover the middle classes and land-moving classes. Even before the self-respect movement was founded in 1925. And EVR started expressing his views on the evil in the society. And the Tamil language weekly Kudiyarasu, founded in May 1924, became the organ of the self-respect movement. The self-respect movement founded in 1925, the EVR started expressing his views in the evil in the society. In Tamil language, the weekly journal name is Kudiyarasu. That means the people government. We founded in May 1924, become the organs of self-respect movement. It was specially directed certain non-Brahmins groups that had not been reached by the Justice Party Dravidian. Shortly after 1930, the Ramasamy Nayakar began a Tamil daily called Vidudalai, that means the freedom. And in 1935, he started a Tamil monthly called Pagutarivu, that means the common sense. But in the late 20s, the Kudiyarasu was the movement's the propaganda weapon. And next we will move on the language controversy. The language controversy in the Legislative Council elections, the Congress won a sufficient number of seats to form a government and Congress. Rajagopalachari became the premier of the Madras presidency. In accordance with the Congress policy, he announced that Hindi would be introduced as a compulsory course of study in the school curriculum for the first 3 forms. The decisions to introduce Hindi in the Madras presidency ignored the linguistic difference between the north and the south and overlooked the strong current of regionalization, which were themselves an outcome of the cultural revivalism that had taken place half a century ago. And there were the 2 main reasons for the Tamil scholars' opposition to Hindi. The first one, the introduction of Hindi meant to them the revival of Sanskrit language, which they traditionally opposed. The secondly, the mother tongue was not compulsory subject in the curriculum in those days, and many passed out of the schools without knowledge of the Dravidian tongue. Therefore, they argued that the introductions of Hindi in the schools without making the mother tongue also the compulsory subject was a deliberate attempt to relegate the Dravidian language to the background. These genuine fears were ignored and Hindi was introduced in April 1938 in the schools. The agitations and demonstrations were launched against Hindi. And let's move on the summary of EVR. The EVR Nayakar represented the new emergence force in Tamil society and he was stood follow over the Gandhian method of struggle against the colonial power. But one of the questions of communal representations and Varnashrama Dharma, he differed from the Congress and Gandhiji and even left the Congress. The self-respect movement was a new development and was a revolt against the artificial divisions of society into Varnas. The movement attracted the masses who were untouched and claimed to fight against social evils like untouchability. The more enduring aspect of the movement was the elevations of Tamil and Tamil culture. Some of the case rigidities were removed, the representations of non-Brahmin communities which EVR fought consistently, and liberal service was secured. But it had also the negative future. It uncritically assimilated the racial theories propounded by the foreign scholar. It saw inequality in society in terms of Brahmin contravents and dominance. This communal outlook led him to call the Congress and the national movement as Brahmin dominated. He even went to extreme extent of siding with the Muslim League and raising demand for Dravidian, and by the maintained throughout that he was not against the Brahmins but was against the Varnashrama Dharma and Brahmins claim to superiority. And next, we will discuss about Jyotiba Phule. This chart explains the Jyotiba Phule views on political thought. Let us see one by one. First, we will move on Jyotiba Phule early life. The Phule was born in Moli, Moli family of Pune in 1827. 1827. In 1848, Phule began his work as a social reformer, interested in educations of low caste boys and girls. When he started a school for girls for low and untouchable caste. Since no female teacher was available, Phule asked his wife Savitri Bai to reach in the school. He opened two more schools for girls in 1851. He was honored by the Board of Dictations for the work he did for girls' education in 1852. The Phule established a school for untouchables and a night school in 1852. By 1858, he gradually retired from the management of the schools and entered into a broader field of social reform. He supported the movement for widow remarriage in 1860 and in 1863 established a home for the prevention of infanticide. And the Phule and his wife Savitri Bai adopted one orphan child from the home because they had no child of their own. In 1865, he published a book on caste system written by one of his friends, Potwell. The organization with which Phule name is associated and for which he is remembered even today is the Satya Sadak Samraj. It was established in 1873 by him and his colleagues to organize the lower caste against the Hindu social order based on Varna and caste system. And next, move on the criticism of British rule. Though Phule preferred British rule to the regime of the Brahmins, he was aware of the shortcomings of the former and he never hesitated to point them out openly. Since his mission was to bring about an egalitarian society where all men and women would enjoy liberty, Phule criticized the contemporary rules if he felt that their policies went against this idea. He was mainly interested in destroying forever supremacy of Brahmins in social, economic, and political fields. Therefore, he used to attack the British government whenever its policies favored the Brahmins, even indirectly. The government used to collect a special cases for educational purposes, but the funds so derived were not spent for education of the masses. He criticized the primary schools run by the government by saying that the education imparted in these schools was not satisfactory. It did not prove practical or useful in the future career of the student. He also criticized on similar lines the higher secondary schools, colleagues, and system of scholarship. The scholarship system he observed was unduly favorable that literally caste, while there was a need to encourage the lower caste children. And next we will move on the philosophical foundations of the critique of social order. And the full criticism of the British government emanated out of his concern for the welfare and the status of the lower caste in contemporary society. According to Poole, the Indian society was based on inequality between man and exploitations of ignorant masses by the cunning Brahmins, who believed that God, who is the creator of the universe, has created all men and women free and capable of enjoying their rights. The creator has created all men and women as the custodian of all human rights, so that man or a group of man should not suffer an individual. The Maker has bestowed upon all men and women religious and political liberty. Therefore, no one should look down upon anyone's religious faith or political opinion. Every individual has a right to property, and the Maker, full thought, has given all human beings the liberty of thought and expression. And but the thought or opinion one is expressing should not be harmful to anybody. The Creator has made all men and women capable of climbing a position in civil service or municipal administration according to their ability. No one should encroach upon the equal liberty of other human beings. The pure believed that all men and women are entitled to enjoy all things the Maker or has created. All men and women are equal before the law. The pure held the magistrate and judges of the court of law should be impartial in their judgment. And Pure developed a critique of Indian society in the light of these fundamental principles. And let's move on. Attack on Varna and caste system. In order to keep a better hold over the masses, they devised the mythology, the Varna and caste system, and also the code of cruel and inhuman laws. And they founded a system of priestcraft which gave the Brahmins a prominence in all ritual. The caste system was a creation of cunning Brahmins. And the highlight rights and privileges were given to the Brahmins, whereas the Sutras and Adi Sutras, that means untouchables, were regarded with hatred and contempt. Even the comments right humanity were denied to them. The touch or even their shadow was considered as pollutions. Pure reinterpreted the religious texts of Hindus to show how Aryans had conquered the original inhabitants. The Brahmins continued to exploit the Sutra from his birth to death. Under the guise of religions, the Brahmins intervened and meddled in each and everything the Sutra did. A Brahmin tried to exploit him not only in his capacity as a priest, but did so in a number of other ways also. Due to his higher education, He had monopolized all the positions in the administration, judiciary, social, religious, and political organization. And the next one, equality between men and women. The another important oppressed groups in the Indian society was that of women. The Peale always mentions women along with men. He did not assume that when men are mentioned, women are automatically included into that category. He make a special reference to women when he discuss human rights, just as Sutras were deprived of rights by the Brahmins by keeping them ignorant. The Peale thought that selfish men had prohibited women for talking to the education order to continue male domination. The Hindu religion text had given a number of concessions to men but had impressed the severe restrictions of women. And he also criticized the economic policy of the alien rule since in many respects it may unfavorable to the poor patients. He suggested a number of solutions to improve the conditions of agriculture sectors. In place of exploitative Indian social order, Peale wanted to establish a society founded on principles of individual liberty and equality, and in place of Hinduism, he would have liked to put in universal religions. The next author will move on, Vijayalakshmi Pandit. So Vijayalakshmi Pandit, so born on 18th August 1900 and was an Indian diplomat and politician who was elected as the first female president of United Nations General Assembly. And the hailing from a prominent political family, her parents Motilal Nehru and Swaruprani Tashu. Her brother Jawaharlal Nehru was the first Prime Minister of independent India. The Pandit was the first Indian woman to hold a cabinet post in pre-independence India. The pre-independence India, and 1937 she was elected to the provincial legislature of United Provinces and was designated Minister of Local Self-Government and Public Health. She held that later post until 1938 and again from 1946 to 47. In 1946, she was elected to constitute the assembly from the United Provinces. The following India's freedom from British occupation in 1947, she entered the diplomatic service and became India's ambassador too. The Soviet Union from 1947 to 1949, the United States and Mexico from 1949 to 1951, the island from 1955 to 1961, and Spain from 1958 to 1961. The next move on, her political career. So between 1946 and 1968, she headed the Indian delegations to the United States. In 1953, she became the first woman president of United Nations General Assembly. In India, she served a governor of Maharashtra from 1962 to 1964, after which she was elected to the Indian Parliament lower house, Lok Sabha, from Polpur. Her brother former constituency from 1964 to 1968. The Pandit was a harassed critic of Indira Gandhi as a prime minister, especially after her niece had declared the emergency. In 1979, she was appointed the Indian representative to the UN Human Rights Commissions, after which retired from public life. Her writing include the Evolutions of India 1958 and the Scope of Happiness, a personal memoir in 1979. 1979. Okay, the next class we will discuss the another topic. If you have any doubt, you will ask Google Classroom comment box. Thank you.